Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Down the Rabbit Hole News. I am the Rabbit. Shout out to you guys. Thank you guys for supporting my channel by subscribing, hitting the like button, sharing, doing all those good things. Now, um, this week there was a documentary, I believe it was Tuesday, that was released that explored the Girls Gone Wild untold story, where a number of victims came forward that were filmed during the time that this franchise was up and running and headed by Joe Francis. It was a well done documentary on Peacock that I would definitely recommend folks to watch. But there were aspects of this documentary that I felt like needed to be very much public and discussed. Now, as much as we have talked about Joe Francis here on this channel, how much of a scumbag he is, and he continues to be, nothing has changed. Joe Francis is unapologetic about the harm that he has caused to various Girls Gone Wild victims. And when I mean victims, I mean women that were drunk, under the influence, sometimes minors that were filmed during this franchise and the time that it was up and running. And I think we tend to forget that we tend to believe that, Joe Francis was filming women that were always giving consent to being filmed in questionable situations. I love the fact that this documentary highlighted how it's impacted a lot of these women throughout their time, that some of these women are still harassed by really disgusting people online because of a time in their lifetime that they either participated in Girls Gone Wild or they were coerced or forced to participate in Girls Gone Wild. Now, in this documentary, it was said that it was an interview that he was choosing to give to a journalist, which I thought was interesting. I mean, Joe Francis talks a lot of ish on his social media, and he doesn't. It's been a couple years, I believe 10 years, since he sat down and given an interview on a major platform such as Peacock. But Joe Francis says he doesn't feel bad for the women filmed on Girls Gone Wild because they victimize me. Now, Joe Francis, of course, does a job. He will throughout this documentary, he very much presented to be the victim of all of this, as well as being targeted. And to a certain degree, Joe Francis is a very controversial figures. Controversial figures can be targeted, right? I find some similarities with Diddy personality wise and Joe Francis. Joe Francis has been described to be like this off the wall, untouchable character, very much with an explosive attitude and behavior towards women specifically. Like, he does not like women, similar to Diddy, right? That anything that they want they can get, untouchable. To me, Diddy and Joe Francis are like one and the same. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anybody that Diddy went to Joe Francis's house, and in Mexico, his resort, he partied it up there. We showed this on a video that I did about Cassie having bruises, visible bruises in her arms when she was at Joe Francis with French Montana and others that were partying it up. And a lot of this with these two men, they share that explosive personality. I mean, hell, there have been leaked recordings of Joe Francis getting physical at the time with his girlfriend or wife, who he shared two daughters with. And it shouldn't surprise us at all. Then you have the likes of Diddy, that's very similar personality. It's been reported that Diddy was physical. We just saw the 2016 video with Cassie. So we know the monster inside of Diddy as well as inside of Joe Francis. Very similar characteristics of these two men, right? They don't like women. Typically, men that act this way towards their partner don't like women. Okay, so in the Peacock new docuseries Girls Gone Wild: The Untold Story builds an argument that the notorious exploitation empire played a fundamental role in shaping the culture we inhabit today. And in the documentary, actually, they do talk about how Girls Gone Wild was like, I mean, this was before, OnlyFans or certain platforms that, have taken off, was what started and ignited this industry of, getting women drunk and getting them to do things that they can't consent to. And although I will say, I don't know what the percentage is of women that were in Girls Gone Wild that consented to do all those things versus those that, were under the influence while consenting, if that's what you consider that, and those that were underage and could not consent. It was amazing to find out in this documentary that there were a number of women and girls that have been put in situations that were underage that were in these Girls Gone Wild franchise, right? A lot of women that appeared on the cover of Girls Gone Wild were working really hard to get their faces out of the DVDs that were being sold by millions. There are a lot of DVDs out there with these women that were victims of this franchise. There is not a good solid number to find out how many of those women actually consented. But based on this documentary, it sounds like there was a lot of women that were taken advantage of during this franchise. I believe it. So in this documentary, Joe Francis sat down with a journalist by the name of Sachi Cool for his first interview, for his first person interview. And they didn't show his face. It was like a recorded interview. And it'd been a while since Joe Francis. I mean, I'd seen him do like an interview on a YouTube channel, a couple of interviews here and there as it pertains to the Kardashians, but never like a sit down to talk about his dealings with Girls Gone Wild and, his startup, how he started. He gives this bogus rags to riches story to this journalist. And because apparently, Joe wants to make it seem like he was a struggling entrepreneur that came from nothing, when that is not at all the case. His family had money and Joe is Joe, right? And so I'm not at all surprised that he would give a fake fraud story about his come up in his financial situation. When asked if he feels bad for the underage girls supplied with alcohol and pressured by his cameraman to film nude scenes, Francis alleges, no, because I don't believe they were victimized. They victimized me. Joe Francis forever feels like he is the victim. And to a certain degree, when he was facing a case in Panama, a RICO case that should have never been a RICO case, but it became a RICO case, and the investigators really fucked up the investigation on that case. And so then really failed, and the whole case got thrown out, basically. It's unfortunate, but that is what happened. And so there's a lot, both civilly and criminally, a lot of victims that will never get their day in court because of how things have been handled with Joe Francis. Joe Francis was able to skip and leave to Mexico and live there. And he's got a lot of problems to the people of Mexico, like a lot. Apparently, it's been said that he has been violent and abusive to a lot of the people of Mexico. And I'm just like, why the hell is he there? Like, kick him the fuck out, That's just my opinion. Let him stay over here so that he can be, charged, served, and people can then start thoroughly investigating Joe Francis the way that they need. So in Panama City, Florida, it is said that there were 4 women who he was filming, and they were doing these sexual acts. Well, it turns out that all those 4 women were underage. And I mean, after that was reported to law enforcement, I guess law enforcement in Panama City got together and decided to file this RICO case. And after that, and having to face the repercussions of that, hiring the attorneys, going through all this stuff. I mean, you would think that a RICO case, what a RICO case is doing now to Diddy, people have distanced themselves from Diddy, right? Well, it had the opposite effect 2008 with this Rico case. Literally, Joe Francis would go to LA. That's around the time that the Keeping Up with the Kardashians franchise was happening. You had Kris Jenner having prison calls with Joe Francis, and he was still running his business behind bars. I mean, I don't know, y'all. Like, I think about the situation because I think, like, is this an issue of race where Joe Francis was able to really get away with a lot of shit? People did not distance themselves from Joe Francis. You had the likes of Kim Kardashian wearing a free Joe shirt, and parading that and saying how she was standing behind Joe Francis in 2008. And now you can't even get these celebrities to talk about Diddy. Like, I mean, both are very monstrous figures. So I just find this to be very interesting that it's like, y'all, we can't keep the same energy. Weird in 2008. It was okay. It was acceptable for Joe Francis to do the crimes that he did. But those Hollywood people have definitely distanced themselves from him, but they didn't do that to Joe Francis. I don't know. Find it to be very weird when all of that went down. But when the journalist reminded Joe, like, these women that you filmed in 2008 were very young. And Joe Francis basically responded, no, they were 17, just shy of 18. They were the ones that victimized us. I believe we all believe that they were put up by the Panama City police and it was all in operation. So I believe that it was quite orchestrated. I walked into a fucking snake pit, okay? So again, Joe Francis has always felt like he is the victim and he can do no wrong. Now, Joe, of course, lives in Mexico, and part of it is because he has an active warrant for his arrest in 2014. He is a coward, all right? So he is staying away because of this, like, arrest warrant. What I find to be interesting about this documentary that I was like, this is really cool that they did this in this documentary. Yes, it was about Joe Francis, but it was also about the people around Joe Francis, like the camera crew, like the chief of operations, like all these other individuals that, participated in the BS. Because, like Diddy, it's not just Diddy, right? There is Diddy's assistant, Christina Koran, right? Joe Francis was surrounded by a lot of people just like Diddy, and he was able to get away with a lot of shit, right? Well, this documentary actually interviews the camera people and they show receipts of, like, audio recordings of the camera training, how they would train their camera people. I thought that was phenomenal to do so that a lot of us would get an understanding of how these cameramen were coercing women, drunk women, to take off their tops and participate in activities that they clearly later regret. Let's get into these recordings. So this woman right here is one of the people that was working for the franchise, and what she actually went through, she specifically talks about Guys Gone Wild. This was another franchise of Girls Gone Wild that Joe Francis started. In their Guys Gone Wild franchise was to entice the straight guy. And she could be heard in the audio trying to get, like, the guy while they're filming, trying to get the guy to participate in the filming and trying to get, like, the money shot, I guess. So here it says our production got access to a recording of a Girls Gone Wild training circa 2005. Listen to how they train the camera people. This is how they were training them to get the women to flash them and participate in stuff.
Once you get them into the position where they're going to do this, you can, like, semi-produce it, like, make sure when you guys get going, make a lot of noise. But my thing is, like, the facial shots, looking into the camera is, like, the hardest thing ever. Like, to see those girls just doing their thing, also they look at that camera, it brings you right in.
We really want to avoid what we see.
That's the woman. She's the one telling them, like, make them look at the camera, okay?
A lot of, which is just, the camera goes on, a girl flashes, the camera goes off, and that's all we've got. We go to the table, it's like, that can't be all we've got. Yeah, that's it. That's not what we want. We want a longer scene.
I mean, you get the quintessential Girls Gone Wild, two females, and they're fucking hot, and you could get them to have sex with one another if you maybe even pay them. Now, I heard that
maybe even pay them.
Are we allowed to pay them on some accounts?
Yes, that's what we do. Like, we don't want you to go out there and promise these girls
Exactly.
a whole lot of money that maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah, a lot of girls, as you know, do this stuff for a t-shirt. Some of them do it for nothing. A t-shirt and panties, some girls will jump off a building for.
Ain't that fucking crazy? This is their training, you know, and sometimes they would just get beads or a shirt or a hat or something.
Those girls had no clue. Not to mention, they're in the middle of the heat of a moment and they hear $100 and they're like, that gets us one more spring break day. They're not thinking, that gets me what? 100.
So this guy right here was one of the cameramen, and he was actually charged with Joe Francis in the RICO case that, you know, had been dropped.
We just watched the first couple of scenes. We like that Mike was very persistent with the hot girl from Allentown, the blonde girl.
Yeah, let me just talk about that, what we liked. It's certainly the girl that doesn't want to do anything that ended up showing her beaver without even knowing it. That's a wonderful transition, and she's very shy, very nervous, and Mike did a super job, so we want to commend him on that. And I love to see guys take a girl who was.
And we want to commend him for that, Mike, for getting a girl to show a part that she did not want to show. Okay.
Not gonna do anything, and all of a sudden gets them to pull down the thing, and okay, I'll show you my thong, and the next thing you know, show me your thong and flash me, and the next thing you know, now they're kind of loose, and the next thing you know, it just goes on and keep going, you know, don't take no for an answer.
Don't take no for an answer. That's just this was the culture of Girls Gone Wild. This is how what they train their cameramen to do, right? So like I said, I appreciate that this documentary showed this other side, because it's like, wait a minute, like, yes, Joe is gross and disgusting, and you know, he's all these things, but it's not just Joe. It had to be the people near Joe, like the cameramen, like the people they were training to do this kind of stuff. They're also disgusting for doing this. They also owe something to these women, and they also should have been charged too.
If she or any other person who's being filmed by a videographer says unequivocally, no, the videographer should back off. True?
It depends the no. If it's no, get this camera away from me, absolutely. But if someone's like, I don't know, no, it's all how you say it.
Joe Francis is very much responsible for a lot of things, but how is it that, you know, we can overlook a lot of these camera people, a lot of the people that were, you know, participating in the production of these videos that have victimized many, many women? And the thing is that we can't just forget about Joe Francis. I think Joe Francis is somebody that needs to be continuously talked about, because, you know, he needs to be held accountable for a lot of the trauma and a lot of the hurt and pain that he caused a lot of people. What do y'all think about all of this? Let me know what you guys think in the comments about this. Have you watched the Girls Gone Wild Untold story? What do you think about making the comparison to Diddy? To me, again, Diddy and Joe Francis are very much one and the same. And what about accountability? Accountability for the camera folks, for producers, for anybody that was participating in the Girls Gone Wild company franchise. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. I'll see you guys on the next one. Rabbits out. Bye, guys.